Hello, this is the first in the Maine Department of Education's Digital Learning Specialist Summer PD series. This session is Rethinking Remote Learning. My name is John Graham, and I'm the Elementary Digital Learning Specialist at the Maine DOE, and I'll let my partner Emma Banks introduce herself.
Hi everyone, I'm Emma Banks. I'm the Computer Science Specialist and the Secondary Digital Learning Specialist.
So just a little summary and sequence for this session. As you can see on the left, kind of a little summary. As we emerge from the cloud of remote learning due to necessity, let's explore what worked and what didn't. We'll share best practices for remote learning, as well as dig into innovative ways to rethink how remote learning can be done. And then the sequence, we've broken this down into 5 sections: setting the stage, so kind of thinking about a year of remote learning that we're just coming out of; analysis to action, making a lemonade out of those lemons; strategy to solution, what are the concepts that we want to keep; rethinking remote, shifting from frenzy to focus; and problem to practice, adopting what works. So setting the stage, looking back at a year of remote learning. So a simple definition for remote learning is the process. Remote learning, a simple definition. Remote learning is the learning process that occurs when a teacher and student are separated by distance and or time. So a quick remote learning history. So we have a little timeline to talk about a variety of different events. I'll let you look through these. So going way back to the first record of a correspondence course in 1728, right up through modern times. I think a couple key pieces to note in there is at the turn of the century, 413 million internet users worldwide. And then if we move forward to 2016, more than 3.4 billion internet users worldwide. So just that explosion happening in that 16-year period. And obviously that lending itself right into a worldwide pandemic where in-person instruction ceased and educational worldwide changes leading to remote learning happening everywhere. So starting with some assumptions, perceptions, and expectations. So one of the things that we need to address is just this idea that remote learning doesn't work. So I know this was something that we reiterated many times last spring when we were meeting with educators and talking with them, is that what we experienced last spring was really emergency remote learning. And even to some extent, what we experienced this past school year with a lot of the instances of people shifting in and out of school, going from in-person to remote, or having remote cohorts. Even though there were elements that were planned, I mean, there are definitely a lot of challenges there that we really need to reflect on. So I think to think that remote learning doesn't work or can't work based on certainly the spring of 2020, I think that's definitely very problematic. And then I would think just kind of based on a variety of aspects with the previous 2020-2021 school year, a lot of those aspects of remote learning were not ideal as well. Things just were not, able to be planned maybe as well as people would have liked, nor as well as, would have made remote learning work to its maximum effectiveness. So definitely the concept of building the plane while flying it. So a couple bullet points to be kind of pointing out. Remote learning became the necessity. It was just what needed to happen at that time. Instead of just ending the school year in March, the idea was to keep it going in some form. So there was little to no time to prepare. So some schools might have had some staff days that they were able to get a few things together. figuring out how to get devices to students if they had devices that they could give out to students. So a lot of that just had to be figured out really on the fly. And the infrastructure was just not ready for that. Whether it was, like I was just saying with devices, there were certainly devices that many schools had, the one-to-one capability, so they were able to send those devices home with students. Many districts did not, so they were needing to either purchase them or the state of Maine actually did a bulk purchasing and distribution of devices, but obviously it took some time to do that. So that whole device infrastructure in terms of systems like learning management systems like Google Classroom, Seesaw, etc., a lot of those systems were not necessarily set up, and students and families might not have been familiar with them. Teachers might not have been familiar with them to the extent that they would have liked. So that was, an infrastructure change that happened. And then just the nature of internet. There were certainly many parts of the state that students did not have internet, and in some cases didn't even have access to internet in the areas in which they lived. So trying to bolster and improve some of that needed to happen as well, again, as things were happening. So this wasn't planned and then happened. It was, literally happening on the fly. And then the disjointed communications. That was another factor as well, where schools maybe were, didn't have a set pattern of how they were going to communicate with people, whether it was emailing parents directly, blasting out phone messages, email messages, text messages, communicating stuff through their social media, through their school website. There were just lots of different avenues. So I think knowing what was the best way, often there was no perfect way. It was just a matter of, using what you had been using, maybe trying to streamline that and stick to one for the most crucial communications. And then the ever-changing guidance. Obviously, living through a pandemic, ideas around, just the science behind it. What made things safe, keeping things clean, sending devices home, devices coming back, cleaning things, sending food from schools to students. All of those things really had to be thought through very carefully, because the guidance was still coming out and was changing on a regular basis. So that kind of pandemic piece is definitely something that provided an additional challenge.
So now we're going to talk a little bit about making lemonades out of lemons. I think we can all agree that the past year of remote learning was not ideal. There's very little time to prepare. So we're going to talk a little bit about a SWOT analysis of emergency remote learning, and then we're going to talk about ways to take that analysis and make some action steps out of it. So looking at this slide, you can see that we've outlined, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of the past year of emergency remote learning. So let's start with some strengths. Some of the strengths we've seen are that some of our students excel in remote learning. They have been able to demonstrate their knowledge better than ever before using technology. There's been an increased access to learning material in general. More things have become digitized than ever before. Asynchronous work makes for more flexibility for both student and instructor. And the ability for teachers to differentiate their instruction is becoming easier than ever before, as well as more possible than ever before. Some of the weaknesses that we've identified: assessments require different design, so offering, a multiple choice quiz may not be as effective as what it once was, because they have all of the resources at their fingertips if they're in a remote situation with access to the internet. We've also seen challenges in building relationships, so teacher to student, peer-to-peer, any type of relationship that would traditionally happen in a school is much more challenging in a remote setting, especially without prior scaffolding to make that happen. Our teachers had no time to prepare, so best practices in remote learning was not even something that many of our teachers had been exposed to before. as well as many of the devices for our students and teachers were not configured for outside of school use. So many of the tools and applications that teachers needed to use with students once things went remote needed to be configured on the different devices, adding another challenge to things. Some of the opportunities that we've seen are, more purposeful use of technology is possible, taking risks and trying new approaches. There's a lot of opportunity for that in a remote setting. More opportunities for office hours and conference time to allow for, small group discussions as well as one-on-one time between teacher and student. There's also more opportunities for innovative approaches to create more diversity, equity, inclusion. So, that kind of speaks a little bit to that ability to differentiate. Some of the threats that have arisen over the past year is, there was no time to prepare students. So digital safety, online safety, all of those kinds of things about how to engage in the digital world. While some students had preparation in that, many students had not. In addition to that, also, connectivity issues, so low and no connection. There are still parts of the state where there really is not internet or cellular signal, so that was, quite a challenge and a threat. And as well as public perception and popular opinions of remote learning in and of itself. Does remote learning work? Are teachers teaching? How are they teaching? All of those kinds of things. Does remote learning equal using a computer? All of those really kind of perceptions and opinions, as well as lacking consistency in approach. So part of that speaks to that idea that, there's no time to prepare. So, teachers just did the best that they could. And so, of course, that's going to result in a lack of consistency, which can be challenging for students. So in thinking about these strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, we really wanted to turn this into an analysis to action of sorts. So we're going to go through what we've deemed a silver lining analysis. So we're going to look at how we can use these different things to take advantage of each other and to come up with some strategies. So we're going to look at a couple of strengths to take advantage of opportunities and come up with some strategies. So our strengths, some students excel at remote learning. There's increased access to materials. Asynchronous work creates more flexibility and the ability to differentiate. And then some of the opportunities we see, you talked about purposeful use of technology, risks and new approaches, allowing for more time to connect, and innovative approaches to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So a couple of strategies that we could pull from these, and this is just two of many strategies that you could pull from these strengths and opportunities. We can use technology purposefully to take risks and try new approaches that will create more differentiation and flexibility for students. So in this case, we're taking the using of technology purposefully and those risks and new approaches and taking that differentiation and flexibility and really trying to wrap that all into an intentional strategy. Similarly, for our second strategy in this section, we've got approach learning design with an innovative lens, ensuring that students have access to high-quality experiences through the use of technology. So really looking at the design of the learning experience with innovation in mind and really look for those ways to create high-quality experiences for students. The next section of our silver lining analysis, we're going to try to use some strengths to minimize our threats. So some students excel in remote learning, there's increased access, more flexibility, and that differentiation. Those threats were no time to prepare, connectivity issues, public perceptions and opinions, and lacking consistency. So a couple of strategies we might pull from this would be to use a peer network to leverage student strengths with technology to help address support needs of other students. So really building that network of students helping students. Another strategy we might pull would be creating assignments that are asynchronous and are designed to require little or no internet connection to complete. So as long as the student has a device, do they need the internet in order to complete it? Could they download something in advance and bring it home with them? Those kinds of things. In our next section, we're going to look at weakness to take advantage of the opportunity. So in our weaknesses, we have assessments require different design, challenges building relationships, lack of time to prepare, and our devices not being configured the way we need them to be. Opportunities, again, is that purposeful use of technology, taking risks and new approaches, and that time to connect one-on-one or in small groups, and then innovative approaches to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So a couple of strategies. Again, there are many strategies that could be pulled and many weaknesses and opportunities that could be listed. So a couple of strategies. Necessity is the mother of invention. This is as a principle. So certain expectations may be minimized and room to innovate is encouraged and allowed. So really removing some of those barriers to innovation and creating that safe space for students to do that work. Hybrid work in groups can help bring students together and allow the teacher to provide targeted instruction and add in time to connect. So by offering a hybrid environment, this allows the teacher to spread themselves out while also having students be connecting and networking with each other and having that peer learning experience, removing that isolation that's often felt in a remote environment. So the last one we're going to look at is eliminating weaknesses to avoid threats. So assessments requiring different design, challenges building relationships, no time to prepare, and the lack of devices being configured were the weaknesses. Our threats, there's no time to prepare students either. There were connectivity issues and public perceptions and opinions, and then that lack of consistency in approach. So a couple of strategies that could be taken from these are to design assessments that showcase student learning and require low or no connectivity, and create consistency and address inaccurate perceptions. So really providing students the opportunity to have choice in what they're showcasing that they've learned, and make sure that they have the option to showcase their learning in any means that they have access to. And then engaging in professional learning to enhance integration of digital citizenship and safety into everyday learning experiences. From PK to 12, there's all sorts of ways to integrate digital citizenship and online safety into what is already being done every single day. So just looking for those ways to actually make that intentional in the daily classroom work. So this is just a combination of all of the different strategies that we were able to pull from our SWOT analysis. This is an activity that would be great for identifying things within your own classroom. So if you're looking to see what the past year of emergency remote learning has meant to you and your students and your classroom, this is a great activity to try to work through, to identify your own strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and then to go through that silver lining strategies process and use each one to try to develop strategies based off of them. So now we're going to move from strategies and talk a little bit about solutions. So what concepts do we want to keep from this past year? So we've identified a few key concepts that are worth holding on to. The first is that connection is essential. So remote learning requires regular communication between teacher and student, and establishing and maintaining that connection is absolutely essential. Remote does not equal computer. So remote learning does not just mean computer learning sitting in front of a screen. The best remote experiences use a mix of on-screen and off-screen learning. We also know that design matters more. When teacher and student are not in the same room, the design of that learning experience becomes even more important, as the teacher is not able to course correct as easily as they are in the classroom. Intentionality is key. So approaching every element of remote learning with intentionality is really key to creating dynamic remote experiences for students. And playing off of that, planning prevails. So thorough planning and consistent reevaluation make the best remote learning experiences for all. And then always remembering that remote learning is hard. Without proper scaffolding and support, remote learning is challenging for both teachers and students. Okay, so now let's dig a little bit deeper into each one of these concepts. So connection is essential. So making connections early and often and keeping lines of communication open and honest are really a great way to set up the grounds for success. Setting that tone of empathy and understanding, knowing that we don't know what's going on in people's surroundings, having them not be in the classroom adds a whole level of unknown to the situation. So approaching every instance with empathy and understanding really is key. And then minding the medium. So the medium that you use to communicate with students impacts the messages that you're sending. So if it's a text-based message, whether that's email or chat or an assignment in Google Classroom, versus whether you're talking to them on the phone or via video conference, just keeping in mind that that medium does impact the message, and so really thinking about what words are being used. Remote does not equal computer, so looking for ways to get students off screen is really a benefit for them and for you as well. You know, having students stare at the screen all day long, just like you as a teacher get fatigued, they also get fatigued. So looking for ways to get everyone off the screen is always a great idea. Engaging students with their community, family, and other surroundings is a great way to make that happen. You can engage in mock interviews or, you know, different activities that they can get out in their community and other surroundings. And then exploring innovative ways that they can demonstrate their learning. So how can they show you what they know in a way that doesn't involve them staring at a screen in order to do that? Or giving them choice. So if they want to use a screen in order to demonstrate that learning, allow them that choice. But if they also would like to create something that does not involve a screen, having that choice is also great. And then building in experiences that allow students to bring their life to the table. So what can you set up that allows them to, you know, show what is going on in their life or allow them some choice in sharing, knowing that, you know, we also want to make sure that we're not putting students in places where they feel like they have to share, but setting it up so that there is a place for them to do that. Design matters more. So starting with that backwards design process and looking at the outcome, like what do we really want students to know from this? And then making sure to design an experience that only addresses those things and doesn't involve all sorts of extra things that are going to potentially cognitively overload them if they're in this technology-based environment. And then consider access and interest. So is the learning experience easy to access, and will students be interested in it? Is there a level of choice there so that they can tailor that experience to their own interests? And then always looking for ways to make it universal. So considering those universal design for learning principles and including multiple means for representation and multiple means for access, all of those different kinds of things. And then really being intentional with your use of color, layout, font, and general design. So making sure that the user experience of the learning design is a good user experience. So are they able to see where they need to click? Are things, you know, color coordinated to be visually appealing? Is the layout make sense? Is font and bold and all of those kinds of things, are those being used intentionally and not just for style? All of those design considerations. And intentionality is key. So building in those systems for feedback and asking for it often. So setting up an expectation that you will pivot based on student feedback and then asking for that feedback often will really help students to feel like they have a sense of agency in their learning experiences. And that really helps them to feel like they're guiding their learning instead of just being told what they're going to learn. Of course, having that agency really helps with student interest. And in a remote or a hybrid setting, that interest is really key for student motivation. And always keep that goal in mind and designing from there. So what do you really want them to know? Again, being intentional about that and then designing the experience based on that. And then planning, plan. Start with your outcomes and design the experience from there, and then look for ways to increase inclusion and equity. So after you've designed the experience or while designing the experience, you can look at it through a diversity lens, through an inclusion lens, through an equity lens. Will all students be able to access it equally? Are there, you know, ways for them to feel like they see themselves in the learning experience? Those kinds of things. Try to plan your experiences as universally as possible, and then reevaluate often. Again, if you set up that system of feedback with your students, they will have less hesitation in being open and honest with you, and you can reevaluate your planning structures based on some of those feedbacks that you're given. And really just remembering that remote learning is hard. So establishing systems of support will be crucial for both student and teacher. Seeking out just-in-time professional learning for teachers is really important, making sure not to get bogged down by too many things and seeking out just what you need in order to improve what you're doing right now. And then differentiating whenever possible. This is great for both student and teacher because you're really able to create a differentiated learning experience for each student and give them that agency and that sense of control over their learning. And then most importantly, really, is just keeping that understanding and empathy at the forefront, making sure that we're not making assumptions about a response from a student. We're not making assumptions about, if they have submitted an assignment, and just really making sure to approach every circumstance with understanding and empathy, knowing that remote learning is, in fact, hard. And now I'm going to pass it over to John to talk a little bit about rethinking remote learning and trying to shift our focus from frenzied to a more refined approach.
So assessing the current learning climate. So now we're thinking about post-pandemic. So, maybe thinking about this summer coming into the upcoming school year. So at this point now we're able to look back and think about what's working well. So maybe over the past school year, what were some things that, it became relevant, like these are things that are working, things that we might want to continue with. So the one-to-one devices, pre-K through 12, so due to a variety of factors, it seems like schools, at least into the next school year, are going to be one-to-one with devices pretty much across all grade levels. I'm sure there's some exceptions there, and there will be some shifts as time goes on. But I think that's definitely a big positive, is just having that level of access that we need. I think the increased familiarity with digital tools, a lot of people were forced to spend some time to really familiarize themselves with a number of the digital tools out there, whether it's a learning management system or just tools for communication. I think finding that variety of tools and working with it was, that was the challenge. And I think there's a new baseline of understanding, thinking about where we're coming from, understanding how remote learning or aspects of remote learning could work well in the future. I think we've moved past, over this past school year, I think we moved past the just frantic, trying anything to make something work. I think people definitely found some strategies, some tools, some approaches that were working pretty well. So now there's that baseline that they're working from. And also the idea of video conferencing has been established. So almost everyone in our society has needed to do a certain level of video conferencing now. So, we make jokes about Zoom calls and just all of the mistakes that can happen and weirdness that can happen. But for the most part, people have been doing video conferencing on a scale that I think it's something that we can lean on in the future. So what is challenging? So I think, just getting back to video conferences for a second, I think people are kind of burnt out on them. I think doing, long multi-hour video conferences might be a lot to ask of people. But, maybe it's something that can be leveraged in the future, but maybe using it a little bit more judiciously for the near future. I think the novelty value is gone. So a lot of the aspects of remote learning that might have been kind of fun and different at first, I think that's kind of gone to the wayside. So then maybe some of the excitement. We did see that last year, that we saw students were pretty well engaged and then kind of dropping off, or, challenging. It was challenging to get them to engage as the school year ended. And then this past school year, I think there are definitely issues of engagement, and part of that was, it was just maybe what was fun or interesting at first kind of went away. Overcompensating an effort to return to normal. So I think this is always going to be a question. Are we going to see schools, push back really hard against using a lot of technology? Are they going to just want to have all kinds of in-person events and stuff like that, which can be fantastic, but I think sometimes it's, easy to lean one way when you've been for a prolonged period of time kind of experiencing things in a different way. So I think that will be certainly one of the challenges moving forward. I think the social needs are higher. So obviously talking about social emotional learning and health, mental health, I think that has definitely been one of the challenges with remote learning, is trying to find how to make that work, how to incorporate that. And I think there'll definitely be continued efforts to promote that and kind of figure out how to make that happen when students return to kind of a more traditional school setting in the future. And then kind of the failure narrative. Kind of, we mentioned this before, the idea that just remote learning doesn't work, can't work, it will never work. Just that kind of idea, I think it's difficult, especially when you're an educator that's just pouring everything you can into trying to make things work, and it just seems like there's this narrative around your area of work that just nothing's working. So I think remote learning, for all its challenges, I think that's maybe one of the hardest. What needs to change? So certainly there's need for more support for students, support for staff, support for parents, support for kind of the educational structure, schools, SAUs. I mean, that just goes without saying. Additional time for planning, that's certainly part of it. Some of that comes from a place of the financial support to get teachers, whether it's back into school, outside of the regular contracted times, to make sure that they're planned. That's kind of definitely an aspect. If you want remote learning to work, it requires a lot of planning to make it work. I think having the structures in place to support some of these shifts. So whether it's, all the infrastructure stuff that we were just talking about earlier, the having devices, having your management systems in place, learning management systems established, your different tools established that you'd use with students. Structures beyond, ways of getting food to students and stuff like that. So if you're shifting in and out of school, whatever that may look like, having those structures in place so that that can happen as smoothly as possible. And I think also offering remote opportunities as needed. So there certainly were students who had success with remote learning. I think there is going to be an interest in figuring how to work with those students, or how to work with those dimensions of remote learning that seem to be working for certain students, and try to offer more of that. I think if people kind of run away from remote learning, there'll definitely be some problems with that, because there were students that maybe over the past year and a half, maybe had a lot of academic successes or learning successes, and it will be really difficult to just have that successful experience and shift back to an experience that was not successful. So reevaluating the toolbox, I think this is going to be kind of a key process in rethinking about the digital tools that you're incorporating and stuff like that. So is it too heavy? So if yes, it does seem like your maybe workload that you're providing students is too heavy, then you've got to kind of evaluate that, check, try to figure out, can you lighten that load in some way? If no, it's not too heavy, still, I think, as with anything, evaluating stuff is good, always going to be a positive. Evaluate that and make sure that there's nothing missing, nothing that's being kind of overlooked. Maybe the load is too light, perhaps. Are there too many tools? If yes, which of those tools might be removed or replaced? So that's something to be aware of, is that students can sometimes be overwhelmed with all of the different things that they're expected to use and know, and sometimes it's just a matter of streamlining that toolbox, so to speak. And if no, there aren't too many, maybe there's some that need to be added. Maybe you've kind of been overlooking something, or been kind of thinking, you don't want to overwhelm your students with too much new stuff, maybe it is time to introduce some new stuff. Do any of these tools need repair? So if yes, what resources are available to help? So if you are having students work with different digital tools, if stuff seems like it's not really working the way that you might want it to, maybe instead of giving it up completely, maybe you just kind of need to reevaluate it. Maybe you need to kind of take a different approach in how to roll it out with students or how to, incorporate it. And if no, you don't think, make sure that you kind of still take some time, like I was saying a minute ago, just you want to constantly be in that evaluation state, making sure that stuff is really working the way that you want it to be working. There's nothing worse than kind of going on this false notion that, everything's going fine, and then you kind of realize I guess it's not, and you have kind of lost the time because of, something like maybe expecting students to have a certain understanding of how to use something that you think that they've used in the past, or maybe they've used a little bit, perhaps using in a different way. It's practically like a completely different tool. So certainly reevaluate and reevaluate often. So preparing for what's next. So this is a good time to seek out relevant professional learning experiences. Be really thoughtful about your own professional learning, and if you're going to invest your time, try to do so wisely. Look for innovative ways to keep the good. So, we've been talking and we'll keep talking about some of the, really interesting ways that people have engaged with aspects of remote learning. And I think even if you're not in a remote learning environment, there are aspects of remote learning that you might still want to incorporate in your classroom. And then continue to collaborate with other educators to improve practice. This is one of the things that I really liked being part of the Moose modules this past year, is I definitely saw a lot of teachers collaborating with people across districts, and it really helped them improve their own practice, improve their technology skills, just thinking about how they're working with their students, learning stuff from other people, keeping an open mind, seeking out other perspectives. All of that was all very positive. So if you're able to, actually authentically collaborate with other educators, that will often, improve things for yourself. So just kind of keeping yourself open for those opportunities.
All right, now we're going to talk a little bit about going from problem to practice and trying to adopt what worked from this past year. So in the effort of trying to look at what we might hold on to, we've developed a few how might we questions to think about. So how might we take what worked and bring it back to the classroom? How might we harness the flexibility and accessibility of remote learning and bring that back to the everyday? And how might we keep hold of the increased ability to differentiate instruction? So here are some things that could be reused and repurposed to address those how might we questions. So hybrid and blended learning, you could consider integrating a blended and or hybrid model. So students engage in some of their learning in the classroom, some of their learning on a device at home, sometimes on a device in the classroom. That's where the blended and or hybrid comes from, because it could be any combination thereof. And that allows students to engage both in class and online with a wider community. Asynchronous enrichment and supplemental. So providing opportunities for students to extend their learning and ensuring that the students are getting the level of detail necessary to succeed. So that speaks a little bit to that differentiation. So if students need additional support, you can provide them with that additional support or provide them with resources so that they can obtain that on their own. As well as students who are excelling, you can give them that opportunity to excel past what the rest of the class is doing in some cases. and as well as flipped models. So looking for ways to flip the classroom. What could be done outside of class? What is a best use of the synchronous time in class? Are there activities that worked better remotely? And if so, how could you integrate that into a flipped or hybrid model? So if you're looking to take things to the next step and you want to move more in this direction of from problem to practice, you could join us for a session on strategies for blended and hybrid learning. We'll be talking a little bit about flipped classrooms and the changing classroom environment and talking about some strategies to accommodate these types of learning environments. So for more information, you can click on that link and also register for the session. And we will also put the link to register for that session directly in the description for this video. We've curated a list here of some helpful resources for remote teaching, blended and hybrid learning, talking a little bit about flipped classrooms. So these are some really great resources to explore, and the link to this slide deck will also be in the description for this video. So if you want to actually click through some of these and check this out after this, you absolutely can. So for any questions or more information, definitely reach out to us. We're happy to help and answer any questions that we can. If you have feedback on this session or you'd like to see additional offerings in other areas that are related, definitely email John or myself, and we're glad that you could join us today.